Of course, why have one when you can have three for three times the price? But at the same time, if you're thinking about the ternary plot, having these kind of representative systems and all the end members might be a, a conceptual framework, which is easy to understand. Of course, funding being what it is, there might be the choice down the road where you have to choose one or two or just one. But if you have representatives at each of these, kind of end member points and that are also potentially logistically feasible to get to, um, in addition to the data that's already there, that might be a framework to move forward.
I was going to add to that some, in addition to the tertiary diagram, people have been talking about like light and temperature, like latitude essentially. And just thinking back to Matthias's talk with just the rapid change in the Arctic is something maybe also we should consider because it's just changing so quickly.
I would also choose sites that are the simplest and the least unique. And like we get dinged from our program managers in DOE of how transferable is the thing you learn in that little site to this place over here. So like transferability of processes. Yeah. Or like limit limiting the very unique behaviors. Like you don't want something that, oh, there's a dike here and a thing there and a weird thing there you need to consider. I don't know if that site exists, but it's like the less complexity, the better.
Uh, and I thought that was a good idea. I think that's like a whole other product, maybe though, is like maybe like this Delta data report card where we talk about the different characteristics and what we know about certain deltas and kind of make like a database which can help to identify those sentinel sites, right? Um, I think that might be kind of like a separate thing from this, though. I think it might be a little too expansive to include in this particular thing. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, latitude was mentioned now a few times, and we had that in our discussion group yesterday or 2 days ago. So I think we run into a problem, right? We can like classify the deltas into like wave, tidal, river dominated. But then the other thing is we could classify according to latitudes what we did. Like we had a box for Arctic, tropical, temperate, and interior deltas. And then if we like combine that, we already have like what 7 to 10, 7 to 10 sentinel sites. So I guess we would probably run into a problem there. But yeah.
Uh, yeah, I would, well, these sentinel sites, I like the term sentinel sites rather than having some, or case studies kind of, where we can sort of focus all our strength to understand the system. But the thing is, it's so diverse, and not talking about the human dimension that it's so diverse that probably the typology of these deltas is probably each of them is unique. So, but a part of that, I think our group here has to, and I would strongly support the sort of database, knowing how each our pet delta works. So mine works like that. It's more storage. Mine is more like a incinerator. Mine has more like export to the shelf or whatever. And so all that have this sort of, we build our own restricted typology, but at least with the one we got, we know. And if we can collect all this information within this group, I'm not talking about the paper. Huh? It's a separate effort. But yeah, that would be that. I think that would be really great because we will learn a lot, like you said, but we have to go on the knowns. And so, of course, there are things in the papers, but sometimes it's not so generic as or synthesized as we would like in these kind of cards. And I would strongly support to have that kind of information in the group. At least we are international. We study a lot of different deltas. So that would be a great effort already done, which we do not have now, to my knowledge. But
when you're making recommendations, you can start with the absolute brute force. What resources would we need to spend, and what new tools do we need from the satellites to really solve this problem? We need to go study every damn delta on Earth and have satellites that look at them every day, and with 1 meter resolution. That's not going to happen. So here's some practical things that we could do in the next 10 years, right? I think it's okay to lay out the 30-year. If we put all of our resources in this for 30 years, we could tackle the hell out of this problem. But here's some real, steps that we need to make. We suggest 3 sites instead of 50. So I think for the paper, it's okay to say, like, this is a grand challenge. This is what it would take to really solve it. Let's do some steps. And then you go write a proposal on 3 sites, right?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say something for myself, then I'll pass it to Kendall. I agree. I think in some ways it's impractical that we all center on one site. I think many of us are going to continue working on our pet deltas, like Christoph termed. And so understanding where they fit in is sometimes more useful than prioritizing one site over another, in my opinion.
One thing to consider is maybe should we be focusing on a site where we have a lot of historical data, where then we have like looking back, or a more brand new site and something that's more exciting. And I don't know the answer, because sometimes I feel, well, I went to LSU, but I feel like we studied the Mississippi Delta a heck of a lot, but maybe that's good because we have a lot of data, but there's also some deltas we never look at. So I don't have an answer, but something to think about.
Should we just focus on one delta or compare with others too? Because just studying one delta is not the solution, as we already know. It's a complex, it's a mess. So we need to study at least 2, compare them.
What is important that we need to study? And leave it there, because then a group can pick up, okay, this publication have identified these 5 things that needs to be studied for deltas across the globe. We are going to focus on this delta because it exemplifies this particular thing. So then I know this is going away from the Sentinel side, but it's something more achievable, because let's think of it like getting a whole delta, tens of $1 million project. But at least it opens the avenue for a infrastructure or kind of a framework where people can think in context of what are the 5, 6 parameters. Maybe there are 6 groups from 6 different countries. Sorry, 6 groups from 6 different countries that can focus on 1 or 2 of these parameters for their delta.
But one thing that's kept coming up over and over again is this question of how do we go across scale, temporal scale and spatial scale. So if you're only funded to go out for 3 years, you haven't gotten a hurricane yet. If you remember, right? You haven't gotten a hurricane. If you're only funded to go out for 3 years, sorry, my bad. I didn't say that. If you're only funded to go out for 3 years, you're only going to get so much information from your pet delta. Right? Versus, something that, like, should we start thinking, or I'm just going to plant the seed, like more like a concerted multi-year effort on process-based understanding. It going out, as you know, like twice a year to a delta might not mean anything, because they're so dynamic.
It can either be done through a big multi-million-dollar funding, or it can be done through a concerted effort like GeoTraces did, like different countries pitch in. Or there could be a program that leads to more international effort that takes care of these things that we think as a community is important to understand for global deltas across different regimes.
One thing I'll add is I'm not sure we know what processes we need to scale up, especially in different sites. And so I think that in and of itself is a research question, like how do we scale up? What do we need to know at different types of sites in order to scale up? And then maybe in like 5 years, we have a recommendation for more specific ways to do that.
So when we consider size, I think two factors we need to keep in mind. First of all, I think many of you want to resolve the global carbon cycle. From the global carbon cycle perspective, large data, large river basins is more important than the small river basin. I know that when you actually do the small river basin, there's a lot of variability, and also they are combined together will may be more important. But from the global scale, so I think large river basins, large data is more important for the small ones. So this is one factor we need to consider. Another factor is we need to consider the data right now or in the future. We need to have a forward looking. So which data will face more important consequence of the anthropogenic and climate related changes. So yeah, this is what we need to consider. So yeah.
So I like the idea of a framework rather than Sentinel. One of the reasons being, for example, the Mississippi River Delta has been studied for, I don't know, 20 years or something. It's been, there has been intense campaigns every year from different teams, and we still don't really understand it, I believe. So what's the point of having a Sentinel site when we cannot even take 20 years of campaigns and extrapolate it to other deltas? So I'd rather see a framework from this workshop.
And so in my understanding, the discussion on Sentinel sites, is it separate from the paper, or how does it link?
If this is something we could recommend.
Oh,
And if it's not, then
yeah.
it's not.
Well, I think I'll echo voices that have already spoken of. If we can't recommend a specific site or a few specific sites, we can at least offer this framework for some vast delta space that we're trying to fill in, and the gaps in that will still speak to where future proposals should go. I mean, if it's, we want 10 years of secure funding to monitor one system really well to capture its full disturbance regime, that's great. That should pop out of this space that is on the board. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's dividing us framework or Sentinel sites, while I think it's not really necessary, because while we propose a framework, if there is naturally a Sentinel site that fits in the framework, all the data is available, it will come up, right? So we don't really have to do really to paint the name. Although if we can, yeah, but I feel like it's
So let's go back to characteristics. So then while we have you in the room before you disperse, let's go back to the framework and the characteristics.
Someone mentioned in the discussion accessibility of the site and being able to perform analysis in time and so on.
If I understanding correctly, a framework we were talking about like transferability. So the process or variable we want to understand for a delta that is easily translatable to other sites. So maybe a framework could come up as in things we have global measurements or things we don't have global measurements. And we really try to understand processes that will processes that will have a proxy for our global measurements, and that easily will be transferable. So for example, if we really understand how vegetation is contributing to carbon burial, and then vegetation is easily global mapped, right? So that's just one example.
I think there might be 2 real measurements of that. In just a few measurements of that in a deltaic system. Yeah, but no, I see your point. We're doing
I think I'm
transferability.
speaking mostly for
gathering historical
processes, right?
data.
Understand one process, and that process will link to a measurement that is global. So a framework could be, what are the processes we really trying to understand for all the deltas? And this process also needs to link to a global measurement. If that makes sense. Yeah, how to scale up.
I think one idea could be, and this could be tested using satellite data too, is efficiency. What is the carbon retention or export efficiency? Because sorry, because that's something that we already have enough data for many of these deltas. We have satellite data for productivity. We have gauge river data for carbon coming out of the river system in many places. So maybe efficiency could be a way to kind of categorize different deltas.
Hey all, we have a NASA program manager on the line with us, and it would be good, in addition to thinking about these in situ data sets that we've been talking about, to think about aquatic remote sensing opportunities. We heard a little bit about that from Mark earlier. Where did Mark go?
He just had to leave. I think,
He
for the
just
airport.
left. Okay. But Laura writes, in addition, because we're working on the aquatic carbon roadmap with other satellite agencies, needs for remote sensing for these regions over the next 10 years would be useful. The in situ data are obviously very important, but also think about those opportunities. She said, she writes, multi-million-dollar projects are probably a thing of the past. So we're going to have to learn how to do more with less. What are the pressing questions that are of societal relevance, and what's needed to answer them? Pick the ones that are scalable. It's money, it's efficiency, it's community level planning. So if we want to spend just a few minutes on aquatic remote sensing, kind of revisiting what Mark talked about yesterday and I mentioned about the next decadal survey too, that would be good. And thank you, Laura. Feel free to I don't know if you can unmute in a webinar, but drop more in the chat if you want. I'm watching it.
I think one thing this isn't so much about, well, it's sort of about future missions, is one thing I'm really excited about for Glimmer, and that would be great to see in other platforms as well, is the ability to sort of do rapid responses and to get at some of the temporal variability that we're seeing in aquatic processes. That's something I'm really looking forward to.
What about the burial portion too? But what you were referring to was not carbon burial. You're talking about the water exchange. And
Retention
carbon
efficiency.
Retention
It could
efficiency.
be wetland, it could be delta front, it could be anywhere. Like, we have a good sense of satellite-based data to look at productivity. We have gauges to know how much carbon is in the river system. So there is a way to look at that retention efficiency. I'm not per se talking about burial efficiency. It could be in the stocks.
Sorry, Julia, you said satellite capabilities? Glimmer?
In terms of satellite capabilities, like you leveraging it to look at temporal variability and respond to events. So like, how do we get a baseline? I think satellites are something that can help be able to help with some of that.
No, I think I don't know if I can say this, but so I think it might be a nice opportunity for early career people to co-lead sections and to kind of understand how review papers are written, get your name on there. So and you should all have access to this, and I don't know if this is a right time to point fingers at people. And okay, I think there's one role for overall lead. I'm pointing my finger right now.
I can do it.
Okay, great, perfect, Shaylee, thank you. But then in addition to the overall paper lead, we should have some co-leads. So any volunteers to co-lead sections? I'm looking at early career people. Great.
Not with Christoph? Not the report.
What resolution do you need for if you want to use remote sensing? You know, a geostationary. So the upcoming Glimmer mission is likely to be around, oh man, I got a lot of texts here. It's 500 meters to a kilometer. And is that sufficient for what you all want to do? What do you need? That's a good thing to think about on your STOML, like in terms of the processes you want to resolve.
Yeah, resolve delta channels, right? So Landsat is nice for most wide channels, the 30 meter, but 10 is better. 500 is definitely not enough for the interior.
Yes, yeah, in terms of, well, in addition to resolving channels, like we said, less than 10-meter resolution would be fantastic. And for getting flow velocity in those channels and being able to quantify the fluxes both inland with tides and outward with river fluxes. So flow velocity at 10-meter resolution or less would be awesome.
Oh, the velocity profile from remote sensing, like vertically having a velocity profile. It's Mark said there were unuseful data already from some satellites, but it's unused and nobody know how to use it. Yeah.
You wanted 30 meters, right? Last night. But does the 500? But does the with the 500, so if the 500 to 1 kilometer scale would be useful for resolving water column primary production by bloom dynamics, would that be sufficient for resolving bloom dynamics? Laura said that Glimmer has a resolution of 500 meters to 1 kilometer. And so in the water column, is that enough resolution to capture the dynamics of a bloom? Like which parts are more productive, which parts are not?
Resolution, but I think one of the issues that come up is when we are looking at extreme events, or as Julia was pointing out, that usually don't work because they're dependent on cloud cover.
They don't work because they're dependent on, okay. So that's, yeah. Let me just ask the other question to follow up on the resolution question. So if that's an adequate spatial scale resolution, then I guess what would be the temporal scale resolution? Like how often would we want the measurement, for example, for this water column retention efficiency that you mentioned, right? And then let's also talk about stochastic events.
Yeah, I think that's a much more difficult one to explain because it will depend, it will vary as a function of river discharge. Like we can see the residence time in the shelf of Mississippi, Louisiana shelf go from few days to almost a month, depending on what is the main discharge from the Atchafalaya side and the Mississippi side. So I think the more is always better. at that point. But also the other important aspect to be able to use a lot of this primary productivity data in a near plume regime is good algorithms, because these are really complicated water signal that is coming out. And unless you have really good algorithm to pick out the phytoplankton aspect of it, it will have large uncertainty in it.
I would agree. And also algorithms for like other things besides plankton too, like TSS and particulate organic matter.
I just want to mention, I mean, it would be awesome to have all data at really fine resolution, of course, for everything. But as a perspective, like in the California Delta, a lot of the blooms start in very small channels. And so early detection is really difficult with coarse scale products. I agree, good algorithms to separate the bloom even versus adjacent vegetation is necessary. And then I'm gonna, sorry, Ryan, to rope you in, but we had a conversation last night about the role of small channels and small deltas as well. And I mean, I agree, probably at the global scale, it's the big deltas driving many of the bulk fluxes, but I think good products that can sum together the net impacts of all of these small channels is kind of a big gap. And I don't know if we can start with that from like large scale remote sensing products, but to remind ourselves of still the necessary small scale products to help bring out some of those dynamics. I think that's still there. Pardon? No, our early career perspectives paper will take a different direction.
Features?
Yeah.
Here. I have a question for Laura and for you all. It seems like I've heard a lot of I've heard some of, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is data, we have some process-based data, and we may have some process-based co-located data with, say, other measurements. And so this might be a question of synthesis to actually put all that data together, say for a particular delta, for a particular report card. So, Laura, you mentioned that those days of multi-million-dollar expeditions are over. Are there opportunities to put together a proposal because it takes so much time to actually find the data and then put it in a standardized form, or even to agree what the standardized form would be. Are there opportunities then where we could just ask for some time and resources to help do that?
Can you hear me okay?
Not an expedition, but like a data synthesis effort.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. That's a great question. And actually because synthesis projects are cheaper, I'd like to think there will be opportunities in the future. But the identifying them, like you're doing now, is fundamental, because we don't know there's a need until you tell us there's a need. So this is great. Now the question would be, and proposing for synthesis activities fits in, at least in the NASA world, especially when you bring in remote sensing data. You can do that pretty much in any solicitation, because you can always center some of the hypothesis or scientific questions around, you first need to do the synthesis and then kind of draw some conclusions. And so, and as I said, those proposals tend to be cheaper because it's mostly people time rather than a big field expedition. So their opportunities hopefully will continue to be there. But the critical thing for us also to help you realize these activities is what kind of questions would you be answering with this synthesis data? And so I think that is also critical for us to understand what are some of the big gaps and needs that exist that synthesizing the data will answer. And as I mentioned, we are living, at least for the foreseeable future, in the era of faster, better, more efficient, more effective, cheaper, and has to have some sort of economic gain. So it wouldn't hurt to frame some of the questions in that regard. And while potentially, understanding what are some of the fluxes is really interesting. Why would we need to do that, and what is the cutting edge and the real application that is then going to be transformative? And there could be there's a bunch that you could say. Understanding this in the Gulf is important for aquaculture. It's important because of the expanding in oxygen. So there's certainly, I would encourage you to think broader if that makes sense. But certainly, I'd love it that you're thinking about this is what we need. This is what needs to happen, because that's the information that we'll take and hopefully run with it if we're allowed.
Great, thank you. Questions for?
I have a comment, going back to Laura's question earlier about scale. It seems when, in terms of economic products that you were just talking about, often what Lucas was saying earlier about like blooms starting in small channels and then getting bigger, but also in terms of economic impacts and human impacts, often the smaller scale resolution is more important. Like if fishermen are thinking about where to go look for plankton, where the harmful algal blooms exactly, I think the finer resolution would help with that. I don't have an exact scale. It probably depends on the problem. And in terms of sites, like I think that would inform, like it would be different sites than global, thinking about global fluxes as well.
No, but you can see how our effort, if we have the position paper / review paper, where we are identifying those major gaps, is going to be useful for future efforts.
Okay. This is Mike Shields. I think we've talked a lot about like the ocean observing from the sort of top down from space, but maybe something we haven't talked about is the subaqueous, what observing we can do. Like maybe we need more glider missions closer to river mouths to try to capture some of the subaqueous delta processes or shelf processes.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about some of the capabilities
Of gliders?
Yeah.
I am speaking way outside of my realm. Sorry. But with gliders, at least where I work, I'm on the chemistry side, but we do have an ocean observing side where we have a handful of gliders with different sensors that you may see on a lot of your, I guess, conductivity, temperature, depth, but you can also mount turbidity sensors, oxygen, ADCPs, I think that may be helpful. So I know there's a lot of technology to be developed in that area. So that's just another sort of pie in the sky thing that we could talk about too.
Oh boy, I saw Christoph and Chris.
Yeah.
And then Nadia.
Yeah, I'll just kind of comment on the sensor and glider and autonomous platforms. I think the technology is out there. It needs scaling up significantly. Something like glider technology perhaps would be a bit of an elephant in a china shop outside, but there are smaller AUVs out there, as well as profiling platforms that can be equipped with all kinds of bioptical sensors and parameters to measure carbonate system, as well as productivity, maybe respiration by proxy. Yeah, and of course the bottom mounted stuff that can get you both bottom processes but also water column.
Yeah, I was gonna comment on the autonomous as well. Gliders are fantastic tool for, targeted studies or, repeated studies, but they cost upwards of 2,000 grand a piece, right? And they need the expertise to operate them. So just again, to what Daria said, there are cheaper autonomous options that can be developed. There's a lot of people working on autonomous options that can be developed. And if we want to characterize the variability, of things, right? Especially if we're talking about what are the temporal scales that matter. Something that's just there sampling all the time. So just some mooring or something might be, if that's what we're going for, right? I think we want something that's continuous monitoring.
So an effort that might be nice. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but in the Netherlands, we have Delta Enigma, which was recently funded, which is about 20 million in monitoring of the Dutch Delta. So we have about 10 different stations throughout the deltas to do ADCP and grain size and all of that in the rivers and estuaries and coasts. And then we have a student quick response force. So in different universities, they get a van, you get some instruments, and you get students on a mailing list. And whenever there's a flood or something interesting, you get these students to go out and measure like the quick response extreme events things. But in addition to that, you get the permanent stations that are being set up as we speak.
Oh, that's me. Yeah, I would quite disagree for one time only, with Christina, the only time. And the first time ever, with the station versus glider kind of observation. It's not my field either, but I'm running a program in France where we have these gliders, and you know, deltas are the place where gradients are important. And so if you want to know something about the spreading of the material from the rivers through deltas and the shelf, you need to measure these gradients somehow. So getting one data point somewhere in a gradient, you capture both the temporal and the spatial variability, because the gradient, of course, is not a fixed gradient. That would be too easy, yeah? So it's a shifting gradient. So having one data point mixes it all. And so, but having a mobile or a lateral vision of the system, like satellites is only the top, but the glider will see everything, or the water column, that tells you much more than just a single point. Well, but that was not my point for what I asked for the mic. It was more like for we in our group we'll also discuss on benthic stations. So stations that you can live there, and I think that's what you said at some point. But this that you live there and that make also measurements also in the benthos. So not on the water column and also the benthos. So that kind of stuff. So we need to have tools that are also capable of telling what's going on in the sediment, also for the recycling and maybe for the storage and so on.
No, I agree. At the end of the day, glider would be awesome, but we also have to keep in mind the logistics. Like we are talking about big deltas. Big deltas come with big traffic, which means, and I face this challenge every year when we go out and put things, tripods and stuff in the water, they tend to get lost or be dragged in fishing nets. So I think in that way, I feel like buoys have the advantage. They're visible. We got the permission. We have them out there, and we'll have the gradient pass through it. They're one data point. More buoys is always helpful, but gliders, but we do, I think what I really think what you have brought up with glider is we do need to move on to newer technologies. I mean, we have been doing delta work for decades, and I think we're a little slow in incorporating new technologies. There might be other ways to do this, but there are challenges.
Maybe leveraging some of the hackathons and stuff that NASA runs to leverage some of satellite technologies.
And just to continue the topic of technology, a good way would to bridge, the need for human, I call it not human resource, but the interaction with the local community, but at the same time get some more data is the citizen science projects. They help inform communities about what we're doing and importance of it, and then can come back with the support from them in terms of money, legislation, permitting, whatever. But also there is technologies being developed to be put on container ships, trawlers, to measure some of these spatial scales that we cannot measure with traditional ship-based and research vessel-based methods. So, and there are examples for the open ocean work, like, the ships of opportunity. There are examples actually for the subaqueous terrain, like with the fins that are being put on the surfer boards that measure salinity temperature, and then this data being telemetry at some center. So there are technologies out there that can help. It's just the adaptation of them, and yeah, at the same time increasing awareness of this work with the communities.
Just a few more points for Christoph to criticize here. That I think from the the shelf to slope, I think gliders might be the best tool we have right now. And that was a really good point that Daria made now, because one of the things that called my attention yesterday on the visit that we did to the water center is the passion that people have for an environment they're living in, and they're seeing that changing, and they're seeing their communities changing. And like, maybe if we can expand on that, right? Like, why do people care about deltas, right? There's a lot of people living around them. It's not just the carbon cycle, and we can tap into that connection that people have with them. So it might be smart of us to put some effort into identifying what are the tools that don't require a lot of training or technology that can be expanded in that sense. Just agreeing.
Yeah, are we ready? What have we not covered? Nitrogen. Well, this is just for carbon instead of Nick, could we haven't talked so we've talked about top down, water column, sediment. Can we talk about what? I mean,
And who's willing to collect alkalinity
alkalinity
data?
So this is actually feeding into my next question. What we haven't spent a lot of time discussing the air sea gas exchange. Alkalinity, okay. Air sea gas exchange, and how we may monitor that, other than the little upside down planters. Like, do we have some points about the framework for that type of monitoring, or is it just similar to the framework for identifying, for example, bloom dynamics in the water column?
But in large systems, you can remotely sense CO2 and compute fluxes. It's as simple as relating CO2 to salinity and temperature. So like what we've done, what I showed in my slides a couple of days ago, was essentially one cruise following a line in the ocean, and then you can use decades worth of satellite data to extrapolate. So there is, feasible
So what's
ways.
missing? We're missing the
data.
intertidal zone.
You need actual data to make that model, right?
Okay.
And so like we've done it in the Amazon a few times.
Mhm.
Has anyone done it in the Ganges or other systems?
No, but
so
you, but you've done it where you could actually take a ship.
right.
We missed a lot of that inner shelf. So I guess I was
That
more
I would
use of data
say,
gaps.
yeah, that's data gap. It's also a satellite product gap. So
Yeah.
if you remember the figure I showed, there's 100 kilometers that we masked off of the shoreline. And so, there's better optical products and stuff like that now, but yeah, near shore, get on kayak
Yeah.
and have a higher resolution satellite.
Yeah.
You can monitor CO2 on buoys. It's not trivial, but yeah.
Okay.
I would say there's a very close link between what the marine CO2 removal community is trying to tackle right now and this question. So their whole thing is understanding air-sea gas exchange in nearshore environments. So there's, focusing on developing new technology for monitoring CO2 fluxes and things like that. So I think we could gain some traction with that community too.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say for these sites that are accessible in deltas or the use of flux towers also, this eddy correlation. Well, again, it's very local. It doesn't give you the overall flux, CO2 flux, but at least in some spots, it can provide a sort of continuous record of the CO2 exchange. So pretty interesting. And this works also for methane. So you could have with methane sensors, you could have both CO2 and methane exchange fluxes. So can be interesting. Again, it's pretty local.
Yeah.
The footprint is a few hundred meters or something. So it doesn't give you the overall system CO2 flux, but at least it's capable of measuring the exchange, the air-sea exchange.
I think, Shelley, you have been talking about data gap, and I cannot speak for all deltas, but just off the top of my head, for Mississippi area, for Gulf of Mexico, or America, whichever. So one thing, if I think of the number of papers that have actually been published on PCO2 in the shelf versus how many papers there are out there in the channels and the river itself, probably it's a factor of 10. So there's a lot less data in these channels, CO2 fluxes in the channels and even in the river compared to the shelf side of it.
So how, let's see, framework is measure CO2 fluxes in channels and.
Yeah, and which is not trivial because the K values are tricky.
Can I make one last point? If we're talking about data gaps, do we want to also make a point on how to expand the community and tap into local knowledge around big deltas or small deltas that can, so that it doesn't require someone from Europe or the US going to every single point?
Yes, I don't have much to add to that, but I also noted that down that we should maybe try to leverage these communities and develop larger scale community data science initiatives, like crowdsourcing, data collection, sample collection. Yeah. What are the simplest things to measure? What can we have the community do that's helpful for us and maybe helpful for the community too, right?
I mean, in Arctic communities, you can have them sample in the winter.
Yes.
When it's dark.
When you're ice fishing.
Yeah.
Shirley's on her way.
Just one idea about like simple things community can measure. I think USGS has this program where they have a stick on the dune of a beach, and then you can put your phone just there, and it's just perfectly positioned to take a picture of the shoreline, and then everybody can do that. NASA has, this is unrelated, but NASA has a tree height app on your phone, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring it back, wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm the early career ringleader. We scaffolded essentially like a perspectives paper. broken into two sections, one kind of about contemporary tools and technology that we see as changing in the coming years, and then a second section about kind of cultural context challenges, we could say. So kind of changing demands on academics, changing communication styles for science, peer review publication processes, stuff like that. I essentially have a bunch of notes that I'm going to type up into an outline. And then I would like everyone who wants to contribute to this to think about possible publications, outlets for this. We talked about EOS, AGU's EOS, but it could be other things. But I'll need to go through the organizers. Would love to be able to kind of send an email out to anyone to opt in to coordinate this further. So maybe we can also set a mid-April deadline for me to get that outline and share it with everyone and get some feedback. From there, I believe we didn't make a big plan or anything, but we'll need to essentially have everyone contribute some bullet points or paragraphs, and then to later touch base. Maybe this is like circa June, to synthesize that. To make an August draft, right? Yeah.
You're the, yeah. Is it C or K?
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Yeah, it's very nice, very complimentary.
But we'll try to make it Delta specific too.
So I think for the bulk of the sections, we have a lead author. We have some co-leads. Definitely there's some room for more co-leads. And I think what would be good for the lead authors. So you all have access to this database. So please add your name. Also, there are the individual sheets tabs in the back where you can add your name to have small groups per geographical unit. And then I think what would be good for the group leaders to call a group meeting by mid-April to fine-tune, start writing, start organizing things. And then to kind of rework that and iterate into a draft by August. I think that's
Do we want space for this? Anyone else?
space or what?
Does someone want to have us help you or help facilitate this product, which is, I think, different from a perspectives position paper and a review paper, this Delta database / report card? Like a start. I'm not sure it would be exhaustive, but just a start. Would you like our working group and this workshop to help facilitate that activity? Lucas is nodding. Marissa and, okay, so Lucas, Marissa, and Christoph are going to lead that. And Chiquita.
You nodded at the wrong time.
Report card. Okay. Roll.
Great. Perfect. With that, I think we're coming toward the end of Leaky Deltas. I hope the leak has been found. God. All right. Any parting thoughts you want to close up? Oh, that okay. Yeah. No, I don't have any thoughts anymore.
I think the organizers, could you come up and help close out the session? This was fantastic. Thank you so much for making the time and the effort to be here for 3.5 days to talk about how much we don't know, how excited we are about the science, some of what we do know. I think this is a fantastic group of ecosystem ecologists, some who work with microbial communities, geomorphologists, physical oceanographers, chemical oceanographers, biogeochemists, isotope biogeochemists. I'm missing some. Who am I missing? My modelers, remote sensing people. This has been fantastic. We have, I think, just in the last 2 or 3 days in our individual groups, we've come to consensus about some of the grand challenges. We've come to consensus about how we think about geographic and geomorphic facies of deltaic processes. Some of us have accessed our inner artist, and some of us have squashed and repressed our inner artist. So I'm going to also challenge you to please fill in your figures while you're still here and in the moment and thinking about these processes. We're going to take it, we're going to synthesize it, we're going to break it up. So that's what we're going to do. Please put down your names now before you forget. Okay, I want to thank Heather and May and Mary for all of their work, and OCB for funding us. Thank you, May. You know, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and this workshop would not have been funded if Heather, Mary, and May did not think it was important. Okay, so this has been a multi-year effort. You can be sure that I'm going to task them with seeing if there are any funds for a second workshop or a second working group. But we'll get to that later. And I'm going to pass this along to my organizers, but also, oh, Heather wants to say something.
I want to thank this group of organizers because this was not something that came together over a few months. This team's been working for close to 2 years between putting this proposal together after a session at an OCB workshop and really making this a community building activity well beyond the confines of the last 3 days of workshop. They had webinars. We had a special early career webinar. This is really a long sum game for this group, and many of them spoke in the webinar or in the OCB session that we had. That's how we kind of brought these folks into the fold, and it's been a really nice collaboration. And you owe them a ton of gratitude, especially Kanchen, who was our local host and was just amazing. And don't forget to thank the catering and the wonderful food they provided and the AV support that kept things running. May was certainly a leader of that and is feeling better now, I hope. She's afraid to make everyone sick. And I just want to encourage you all to keep talking together, keep communicating, and keep collaborating together. You know, there will be opportunities, whether they be from agencies or, you know, OCB has funding at least for the next year, and we will release another solicitation. So if there are specific things you think about for community activities that would be of value to kind of nudge this research area forward, that is another opportunity. Those usually come out in late summer, so August-ish. So if you are on our mailing list, you will hear about that. And if you have any questions, always just come ask me. Like I said, US Carbon Cycle Science Plan. I can bring your suggestions from this community to that plan and thinking about actions and observational priorities for deltaic systems. So, you know, stay in touch with each other, with the OCB office, with this fantastic team of scientists who put this all together. So thank you.